I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a returning viewer, it is so nice to see you again, and if you're a new viewer, I'm glad that you made your way to my little corner of YouTube. I record two different types of episodes, and this is a Project Snapshot one, which means that I will only be talking about my works in progress. I do have 4 going on at the moment, and you have not seen them before because I happened to finish everything on my needles, and so I got to do a lot of new cast-ons between the last time I recorded and now, which is always fun. I think I don't think I have anything administrative that I need to talk about right away. There's Thistle. She's my puppy co-host. There's her head. I know sometimes she's confusing because she's so fluffy. And my cat co-host Moth is behind the camera, sleeping on a chair, so we'll see if she decides to come over or not. I want to apologize for the new setup. I know it's not as good as the old setup. I miss that clean, clear background as opposed to all this cluttery chaos, including throw pillows that are blocking my super shiny computer. But I live in a studio apartment. I had to rearrange the furniture, and this is the best we've got. So, luckily, I can still hold knitting up to the camera, which is what is most important. First up, I have a new sweater to share with you, and that is the Soda Shop Cardigan, which is a self-designed pattern. Here is my design swatch. The colors are showing up a little lighter, and brighter. Are they truer back here? They're still a bit more muted in real life. It's quite cloudy and overcast today, so I had to bump up the exposure on my camera, so that might be blowing it out a bit. But here is my little design drawing schematic. And so you get a general idea of what I was aiming for. And then I actually have a lot of this cardigan done. I was struggling with insomnia this past weekend, which is not the way I would have chosen to spend my weekend, but it did give me more hours for knitting than usual, so that's how I made so much progress. And here it is. So I have finished the body up to the underarms. I have finished the first yoke, and I am working on the second yoke. This is knit out of Quince & Company Lark, which is their 100% wool, American wool in the worsted weight, and that's the other reason it's going so fast. So I'm knitting it at 5 stitches to the inch, and worsted weight projects just, I don't know, it's like they knit themselves. I'm so used to knitting fingering and sport weight sweaters that whenever I do a worsted weight one, it surprises me, especially in a project like this, which is mainly stockinette, so I can just go. I decided to knit this as a kind of sweatshirt equivalent. The Tidepool Cardigan, which I gave away a couple episodes ago, it was a purple sweater, and I used that as a sweatshirt equivalent until my skin got too sensitive to wear it. And so I really missed having something that I could just throw on over my PJs when I was walking Thistle late at night, or, I don't know, just all the time. So this blue color of the Quince & Company yarn is Bird's Egg, which is an incredibly beautiful muted turquoise, I guess. It's like a Tiffany blue, a muted Tiffany blue. I guess that's why Bird's Egg. Robin's eggs are a similar color. I received this yarn in a sweater's quantity as a Christmas present, I think 3 Christmases ago, and I knit it into this really cool pattern that was kind of like a riding jacket or something. It was very Victorian-esque, and I love the yarn, and I love that pattern, but I didn't love them together, and it's because I was a fairly new knitter when I did this, and so I knit the Lark at 4 stitches to the inch instead of 5 stitches to the inch, and that meant that the fabric was quite thin. However, it was a jacket, so the kind of weather when I would be wearing it was also weather that was quite windy, and so since the fabric was thinner, the wind would just cut right through me, and the jacket had quite slim sleeves, so I couldn't really wear it over longer sleeves, which would have given me more protection from the wind. So even though I loved it in theory and practice, I just didn't wear it that much. So I decided to rip it out and reclaim that yarn. And I'm so happy that I did. So for me, the starting point was really how retro this color feels. Aquas and teals, this color seems very 1940s, 1950s to me. And that's why I'm calling it the soda shop cardigan, after when you could go down to the drugstore and, you know, the soda jerks would whip you up a custom drink. So, excuse me. And the other thing, so I knew that I wanted to do something that was fairly kind of retro. A lot of my designs are influenced by the past and vintage inspired, but I wouldn't say a lot of them have a kind of, when I say retro, I think of that kind of mid-century, I don't know, cheerful rockabilly kind of thing, which I know is a very limited meaning of the word, but that's what I was thinking. And because it's worsted weight, I thought it would be a really great, and I don't plan to knit many worsted weight sweaters, I thought it would be a really great opportunity to do the little flex. The first sweater that I knit was a baby sweater, and I did similar flex. It was my first stranded knitting too. And I really loved how it looked, and I had wanted to do something for myself ever since. And I thought that with the worsted weight, the stitches would be bigger, and so the flex would be more noticeable. There you can see them. So that was all going through my head, but I wasn't really, and then the other thing I wanted to do with this sweater was experiment with a contrast colored yoke, because there are so many absolutely beautiful circular yoke patterns on Ravelry. However, I have quite broad shoulders, especially compared to my smaller bust. And so a lot of the circular yoke patterns, I feel like they would enhance the breadth of my shoulders and make me feel as if, I don't know, that's just not the look I want, as if I was a linebacker or something. Sorry for the texting. I have a phone call that I can't miss, so I can't turn my ringer off today. Anyway, and so what I was thinking was that perhaps if instead of doing contrast color stranded or whatever, you know, a lot of those are stranded yokes, but this isn't. Across the entire shoulder line, if I did a set-in sleeve and just did the design feature along this part and then just have plain sleeves, that might be a way for me to enjoy that look, but also feel as if my body was looking in the proportions that I want it to look. That was an incredibly awkward sentence. I'm trying to, it's not that I don't like my body or that I have low self-esteem or anything, it's just I prefer certain lines on it. And, okay, so that was the other thing that I wanted to do with this sweater. So I decided to pick two contrast colors so that I could do something with just the two of them in the yoke, and then have both of them as flex in the body, and then do corrugated ribbing at the cuffs and the bands, because I love corrugated rib. So that was in my head, and Quince & Company has a really wonderful range of colors in their core wool line. But even though I have their color cards, I feel like sometimes it's tricky to pick color combinations, even with color cards, because, you know, color cards are, each color is like that much versus seeing it in the skein. So I decided to wait until my trip to DC, which was in, I think, March, yes, when I knew that I would be able to go to a store that had Quince & Company yarn. Also, for new viewers, my camera only records in 8-minute segments, so that's why there's always quite a bit of merging together in my episodes. I did turn the exposure down 1 to see if that would make the colors a bit more true. I don't know. I can never tell. Sometimes they look different on the computer screen versus the camera screen. But anyway, so I went to Looped Yarn Store, which is in DC. I think it's in Georgetown. I took the subway and then I just came up at the stop and walked. I just followed Google Maps, so I am not terribly aware of DC geography, but that was so exciting. It was my first time visiting a store that stocks Quince & Company, and just being able to see everything in person at once was wonderful. I had my mom take a couple photos of me in front of the wall of Quince, so I will insert them now. And my main job while I was there was not to buy up all of the quince yarn, which is what I wanted to do, but instead to pick 2 contrast colors. And I knew that they both needed to contrast enough in value with the bird's egg in order to show up as flecks. So they either had to be lighter or darker enough to, that's what value is. It's how close to white or black something, a color is. So when you take a black and white photo and you see whether things are similar in shade or not, you're testing value. Anyway, and then I wanted them to also look good with each other, obviously. And after quite a bit of debate and decision, I ended up with Maple and Canvas, which are actually both colors from their newest line, so I didn't even have those on my color cards. But here they are. Canvas is showing pretty true to life. It's a really beautiful, I guess you would call it beige, but it's got a lot of pink undertones to it, which is really nice. So it's a kind of beige that I can wear. And then Maple is more muted than it's showing. And it's kind of right on the line between, I would call it a dark rose pink versus actual red, maybe back here. But it's kind of right on that line between pink and red. And so altogether, I just thought it would make a really fun retro feel to the sweater. So that was sorted. And then with my design swatch, I already knew that I wanted to do the contrast band at the bottom. And I was experimenting with whether the flecks should be closer together or further apart. I ended up deciding further apart. And then I did try a few stitches up here. Because it was worsted weight yarn, I did not want stranded knitting because that would have created a double layer of fabric. So I pulled out my Barbara Walker stitch dictionaries and I looked at a lot of her slip stitch color patterns, which I used for the first time in some socks I did for Advent, which were really fun. But it made me think about how you don't really see many slip stitch patterns in sweaters, and I think a lot of them will be very nice for sweaters. So I tried out a few of those, and then I went to this chapter called Fancy Color Designs. I don't remember, but anyway, the final winner was this one, which is not a slip stitch color. It's actually just stripes, but in a textured pattern. And it's the 2-color star stitch, and I have it linked on the project page on Ravelry in case you would like to do it as well. I think it's really pretty. And it's really simple. It's just a 3-stitch repeat, which is great because that means that you can shape in your yoke without too many issues at all. I think the back is really neat looking too, actually. So I had my design swatch, and before I did this swatch, I did a very small swatch to make sure that I was using a needle size that I liked the fabric on. And I did, so I'm knitting it up at 5 stitches to the inch, and I really like that fabric. It's got a bit of drape to it, but it's also sturdy enough that the wind isn't going to cut through me. Originally, I thought I would be knitting this sweater in pieces, which is why I started doing a worsted weight sweater in the summer. I prefer knitting my sweaters in pieces and then seaming them, the bodies. So that's just what I had imagined doing. But then I realized that if I was only going to do a fleck every 6th row, and I was alternating colors, that would mean that if I carried the yarn instead of breaking it, I would be carrying it up 12 rows. And that's about 2 inches at this gauge. And that just seemed like it would cause problems. So I realized I was going to have to break the yarn for every fleck row. And in that case, if I knit the body all in one piece, then I would have fewer ends to weave in, because if you knit it in 3 pieces, you're going to have 3 times the ends. And this is already probably going to be the sweater that causes me the most ends to weave in, but I'm just not worrying about it. So that's how I got to knitting it all in one piece. And you can see all my ends, well, there, can you see them all? On each side, as well as obviously the inside, which has more of a stripe. And if I hold it this way, you can see that I did do some waist shaping. This is going to hit at my high hip. It's not going to hit at my waist like all my cropped fingering weight sweaters. I wanted it a little longer, but not too much longer because I wanted to be able to wear it with skirts and dresses, and high hip is really the longest I like a sweater to hit me if I'm wearing a skirt or a dress. And I can imagine wearing this a lot with my woolen trousers. They're like vintage, wide-legged, high-waisted trousers that I wear a lot in the winter, and I thought that would be a really nice length for that as well. So my high hip measurement is not that big. The wide part of my hips is much lower. So my actual high hip measurement I think is 31 inches, 31 and a half, which is going to be, what, 60, 75, maybe 78 centimeters for all you metric people. And Amy Herzog's books, I wonder if you can hear the thunder. Hopefully I can out-talk the storm. Anyway, recommend a pretty significant amount of negative ease in the hips because otherwise your sweater kind of hangs instead of hugging and it looks like it doesn't fit. So because of that, the hip band was actually not that much bigger than my waist measurement. My waist is 24 to 25 inches, which is right around 60 centimeters, 60 to 63. And so, as you can see, I really didn't have to decrease that much. I'm also doing an inch of positive ease, or 2.5 centimeters, in the waist. So I think I had to do like 3 decrease rows, and I'm kind of glad I didn't have to do any more because that's quite a short distance. Oh, and then I did have to do quite a few more from the smallest point of my waist to my bust line, which is 33, 34 inches. But I'm very long through my waist, so I had a lot more time in which to do that. So I did choose to leave all the waist shaping at the side seam instead of putting some of it in the front and back as darts. Just because I didn't want to have to worry about the pattern being disrupted. And I figured since I'm planning to wear this fairly casually, ooh, there was lightning too. Anyway, it wouldn't matter if there was a bit of extra fabric in the back. I really don't need the front darts, but I do have a sway back, and so we'll see how that fits in the back. But yeah, so I'm doing an inch of negative ease in the bust. Just because when I knit the gray worsted weight sweater a couple months ago, I discovered that it doesn't look fitted unless there's at least a bit of negative ease. Going with 0 ease, it looked baggy on me. As far as the actual knitting goes, it's always fun to knit back and forth. I don't know. It was very fun to knit with like a bouncy worsted weight wool compared to the things that I have been knitting with lately, so that was nice. But as it got bigger, it definitely started to feel a little heavy and unwieldy, and I was longing for my in-piece sweaters. That's one of the main reasons I like to knit sweaters in pieces. I find it much more comfortable on myself, especially since, you know, I'm not used to big worsted weight things. But I persevered, and it wasn't too bad. I will admit that having to do this front yoke while like all this other stuff was hanging on the needle, the first few rows were a big pain. Once it got long enough that I could easily turn back and forth, then it was fine. But those first rows were definitely annoying. And I'm just using Ann Budd's Handy Book of Sweaters for the yoke shaping. And I'm going to do a crew neck. And I've just finished the armhole shaping on the other side. And I guess the only other thing to talk about is the cast on. I did a 3-color braided cast on, and this is my first time doing it. Isn't it pretty? I really like how it turned out. I did it in my swatch as well, and I experimented because, and I've included a link to this on the project page too, a tutorial video. It's basically a long tail cast on, but you're twisting yarn around, and it's actually quite simple to do, although you do have to stop and untwist your yarn occasionally. But it does mean that the first row after you cast on, the stitches are also in 3 colors. Let me see. If I pull it down a lot, you might be able to see that. And so when I first started doing it, I was really worried that those 3 colors would show, and I wasn't sure how I was going to transition from that to the corrugated rib. But once I tried a couple options in my swatch, I realized that actually you don't see that first row of stitches at all because the braid kind of comes up. And so the first row is the wrong side row. So I just purled across in both colors all the way, so that, because if I had started the corrugated rib, knit 2, purl 2 with that first row, then you would have gotten blips of color. So instead, I just did, I purled all the way across, just alternating the colors, and then that set me up beautifully for the corrugated rib. And it turns out, corrugated rib for me, knitting flat, is easier than knitting in the round. I really dislike it in the round because I knit, when I'm doing stranded color work, I hold one color in each hand, and I just find ribbing with the English or throwing method where you have to actually move the yarn is so annoying. But for some reason, when I'm on the purl side, it seemed a lot more efficient. Thistle is not a big fan of thunderstorms, so we might see her getting closer. Yeah, so I cannot wait to be able to start the sleeves for this. I love sleeve knitting. And yeah, I might actually do the sleeve as a reward once I finish the second front yoke and leave the back to later. The one thing that I would love your opinions on, because I haven't decided yet, is I know that I'm going to do the cuffs for the sleeves the same way that I did this hem bottom. I haven't decided whether to do the flicks of yarn up or not. So if you have an opinion about that, I would love to hear it. And the back yoke is not going to be like this. It's just going to be plain stockinette with the flicks, in case you were wondering. Because I only bought 1 skein of each of these. And I'm not sure if there's enough yarn. Although, we'll see. If I have enough yarn, I might do a contrast. I like that I don't have to make all the decisions before I start knitting. I can change my mind as I go. Whoops, dropping yarn. It's gotten really dark because of the thunderstorm. I'm really sorry, but if I don't record now, I'm not going to be able to record for at least another few days, perhaps another week. So, sorry. Hopefully dark is better than nothing. My next project is a gift project, and you'll be able to see it no matter how dark it is. It's a pair of socks, and yeah, it really is in fluorescent orange, so you know they're not for me. This is in, I already finished one, so I was grabbing it. This is in Knit Pick Stroll, which is a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon yarn, and it's their Brights line in the colorway Hot Tamale. And these are for a really good friend, and his favorite color is orange, and he is not shy of bright colors, so if he wears them while jogging, he will not be run over, even in winter. The pattern is a free pattern on Ravelry. It was published in Knitty magazine, and it is called Nemesis. I think my poor camera is struggling, but hopefully you can see that there's these really cool curvy lines. Yeah, it's hard for it to find focus because it's gotten quite dark. There we go. They go all along the sock. And essentially, and this is a free pattern, so I'm not giving any away, this is the blueberry waffle sock pattern, except with some movement going on. So it is a really fun knit. Every other round is just knit. So it's much simpler than it looks, and I have really enjoyed it. I picked it because it looks vaguely scientific to me, and he is a biologist. He wears a men's size 11 foot, and this pattern came in a 72 stitch size, which is what I'm knitting. I was a little worried it might be too big because judging by the size chart and my usual gauge of 8 stitches to the inch. I thought I should be knitting around 68 stitches for him, but luckily with Stroll sock yarn, which I haven't used before, I'm getting more like 9 stitches to the inch. I measured on the sole, and this is a really nice and stretchy pattern because of the garter rib, so I think it'll fit him just fine. And I always use the German twisted cast on whenever I'm doing anything other than 1x1 ribbing, because I really like how it looks and I like how stretchy it is. The heel flap is just according to the pattern, and you continue the swirly rib thing all the way down, which I thought was neat. That does mean it's not reinforced. There are no slip stitches, so hopefully it will wear fairly well. And then you also continue it onto the toe. The purling goes all the way up. So it's just a really lovely, thought-out little pattern that I'm very much enjoying, and I think I might use it again for future gift socks because it looks quite impressive, but it's quick to knit and quite fun. So the second one is ready for its heel. That's why the front stitches are all on the stitch holder, so I can start the heel flap. And because someone always asks, this is my Knitzi. Apparently thunderstorms are not good for focusing, but it's spelled Knitzi, and yeah, so that's where I got my DPM protector. It's made in the US. It was another Christmas present. So that is that project. It's been really fun to just follow a pattern. I have quite a few gift socks in my future. When I ordered that yarn from Knit Picks, somehow I ended up with 7 socks worth of yarn, none of which is for me. So, whoops. My next project is for me. I'm alternating skeins, and I'm really in love with it. So this is my Rosemary and Roux stole, and that's pretty accurate. Isn't it a lovely green? There's a story about this green. But first, I will tell you that I am using the Understory pattern by my friend Erin. It is a paid-for pattern on Ravelry, but she is giving a copy away. And that's currently going on in my Ravelry group. I will include the link to the thread, which includes the prompt, so you can go ahead and enter if you're interested. And you should be interested because this is just an absolutely beautiful lace pattern, and it's knit on the bias. So it's being shaped, and look at how beautifully Erin has done that shaping. I mean, that looks completely organic, and then here's the side with the increases. I'm really impressed. I mean, I know that she's my friend, so you're probably thinking I'm biased, but honestly, if I wasn't impressed, I wouldn't have bought the pattern, because I actually bought it. She offered to give me a copy, but I just thought it would be better to buy it, both to support her and because I think that you view things differently when you've paid $6 for it versus when it's been gifted to you by the designer. So, yeah, it's just a beautiful, easy to read pattern to follow. It's both charted and written, so you can pick what's easiest for you. She includes suggestions for how to modify it, either width or lengthwise. And what's cool is the lace changes as you go along, so you're not stuck knitting this for the entire length of the scarf, even though it's a really fun lace to knit, and it's nice and symmetrical, so it's really easy to notice if you've made a mistake and see where you are. So I think this would be great for someone who hasn't had a lot of lace experience. All the wrong side rows are purl rows, so you get to rest. Anyway, and then just when you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting over the leaf thing, then you get to switch to a different kind of lace. So it's just a lovely pattern, and I'm glad that I decided to buy it because I cannot wait to wear this. The yarn I'm using is Barrett yarn. I always want to say Bartlett yarn, I think because of the West Wing and the President, but it's Barrett yarn, which is Susan B. Anderson's yarn company, and this is her Wisconsin Woolen Spun Fingering, which I'm 90% sure is from the Blackberry Ridge spinning mill, which you can also buy yarn directly from them. I have all their color cards, but I've never actually bought their yarn. And it comes in 100-gram skeins, which are about 450 yards. So I have 900 yards to work with, which is a little less than the pattern calls for the larger size. It's written for both a scarf and a stole. So I went ahead and cast on one fewer repeat, and then I'm keeping an eye on my yardage, and if it seems like I'm running short, I'll just shorten a couple of the sections. So I ordered this yarn in the colorway Bay Leaf, and she was offering free shipping during July 4th, so it wasn't an impulse purchase. I've been looking for the yarn to knit this scarf pattern for a couple weeks, and I hadn't found anything that seemed just right. And a few days earlier, had been looking at the Barrett yarn in this Bay Leaf colorway. So I had thought about it before, but the free shipping is definitely what cinched it for me. And it arrived really quickly. I was very impressed. But once it arrived, it was the wrong shade of green. I'm incredibly picky about light greens. The difference between a light green that I like and a light green that I dislike is very tiny. I have some visual aids to illustrate how picky I am. This green, I love. This is a top I found at Goodwill a while ago, like years ago. And I love that jade kind of silvery green color. And it flatters my skin tone. This green, I dislike. This is an old towel that my mom gave me because she knows that I like to use rags instead of paper, so it's always nice to have more rags. The only disposable paper in my house is toilet paper, and it's 100% recycled because the logistics of going toilet paper free, I don't know. That's a different discussion though. So as you can see, these colors are very close. But this one, I'm not sure if the camera's going to pick it up, but in real life, this one is more silvery, and this one is more yellow. As I said, I am extremely particular about light greens, and so I really shouldn't have ordered it online without a color card. But I looked at the project pages, and it seemed like it was going to be a cooler green, and the reason why I'm so particular is that if a green has yellow in it, it turns my skin a very unflattering shade. So this arrived, and it definitely fell into the more yellow camp. So I decided that I would just over-dye it. So first I over-dyed it blue to make it cooler, and that did make it cooler, but it also made it more vibrant. And then it was too vibrant for me. So then I dyed it red to make it more muted, and then it was too warm. And so this was like this ridiculous back and forth process. I think it ended up in 6 dye baths before I finally got the color that I wanted. But I'm really happy that I persevered because I love the result. And that's why I decided to alternate skeins, because it's definitely not even. And I did encounter a few mishaps during my over-dyeing adventures. Let's see that section. Let me show it. Luckily, it looked worse in the skein than it does knit up. But I guess usually when I dye, I only use Kool-Aid and icing dyes, in case you haven't heard me talk about dyeing before, food-safe dyes. And I guess I usually dye small quantities, and so I have a quite large stock pot, and that's what I always use, and I've never had a problem with the yarn not fitting before. But I was trying to dye both of these together so that they would be a similar color, and when I put them both in the dye pot, I think there just wasn't enough room for the water to move around, so I got patches of red when I was trying to use just a very light red just to tone down the green, not to make it actually red. And so trying to sort out those splotches was kind of intense. And I was a little, finally when I got to this shade, even though it definitely still has some red bits in it, I decided that I should just quit while I was ahead. You can see it. I might need to break the yarn at one spot. That's the worst spot. See, actual red. So I'll just break the yarn there. But I decided to quit while I was ahead and see what it would look like in fabric. And luckily in the fabric, even when it's not thunderstorming and pouring rain outside, you really don't notice it, especially since I'm alternating skeins. So I got lucky there. But yeah, I definitely learned the lesson that if I want two skeins to match, it is much better to just measure and do the same measurement and technique than try to stuff them both in the same dye pot, because they're not going to end up looking similar anyway because there's not enough water to move around them. But yeah, so that is my story there. Oh, the story behind the name Rosemary Roux is it's named after one of my favorite fantasy series, which is by Shauna Maguire, and the first book is called Rosemary Roux. It's a really excellent story that follows the main character, whose name is October, but she goes by Toby. I seem to really enjoy books where the heroine is named after a month. Anyway, the first book, basically, all of her old life through no fault of her own, has disappeared, and she has to reconstruct a new life and figure out a new place for herself. And the series follows through with that. And it also has a very elaborate structure for fairy, and there's all these different groups of fairies. And it's just really excellently well done, and you really come to care about all the characters. But I love that it's about someone who is not a teenager, she's older, kind of reconstructing a life as opposed to just starting out in life. So I decided to name this after that, not only because I think that this is a very herby color, and then just dropped one of the balls of yarn. With the leaves, I definitely wanted a nature name, but also because the pattern is called Understoried, and that's because Erin wanted a pattern to gift to people who had supported her in a difficult time in her own life, and so Understoried is about kind of the invisible things that hold us up. And obviously my friends and family, I mean, they support me. I wouldn't have the life that I have if I didn't have certain amazing people in my life. But books and reading also support me. They're always there for me, and if I could not read, I cannot imagine enjoying life. So for me, beautifully written books like Rosemary Roux and the rest of the series are definitely one of the underpinnings of my life. So that's why I decided to name the stole after them. You can see, isn't it fun? Knit on the bias. What else is there to talk about? Oh, the reason why this is in balls, usually I do center pull cakes, and I hand wind either way, so it's not like it's harder to wind a ball than a cake. I just prefer because the cakes don't move. However, when I was knitting my last scarf, that was my first time ever alternating skeins, and I expected to really be annoyed by it, and it didn't really bother me, but the yarn did start to twist around itself, and so I decided that I should see if winding it into balls instead of cakes made it less likely to twist. So I will report back on that. So far, I do think that it's easier for alternating skeins, but these are very large balls. I don't have a small head. And they do have a tendency to roll off the couch, and if I don't pick them up right away, the pets do get tangled up in the yarn. So that's the downside. I should just grab a bowl from my kitchen and leave them in a bowl, but because there's two of them, it's just... So I'm not sure if that downside is worth it. Erin had a great page that was linked to in her pattern with suggestions for people who were alternating yarn skeins because they were using hand-dyed yarn. And I really loved her suggestions. I think it's working out really well, and it's much easier than the method that I tried last time. So I'm really pleased about that. I will ask her if I can share her method on the podcast or not. But yeah. And that is everything about this. I'm really enjoying it. It's so nice to work with a woolen spun kind of farm yarn again. And I think it's going to block out beautifully. It's a 2-ply, so you can already see all those yarn overs just want to hang out on their own, and when it blocks, it's just gonna be wonderful. And I just love woolen spun yarn. Oh, there was one more thing. The needles. I knew there was something else. So these are Lykke, Lykke, which is a Norwegian word, and I have never studied any of the Germanic languages, so I have no idea how to pronounce it. And the company, I mean, it says that they're made in India, and so I don't know if it's actually a Norwegian company or if they're just hopping on the, like, woohoo, Scandinavia bandwagon that's going on right now. Oh wait, what's the Danish word? It's hygge, right? So this is probably hygge. Anyway, so these are wooden needles. They're made out of birch, and then they're painted this gray color that's called driftwood, but they're not made out of driftwood, as romantic as that would be. And I have interchangeable circulars that start at 0 and go through 9. However, my set of 0 to 3s are metal. They're heavy metal by DyakCraft, and I've used them for the majority of the sweaters I've knit, as well as a lot of hats. I do socks on DPNs and mitts, but anything that you would use for regular circular knitting, I've used those. And I love the tips. However, I've always preferred using wooden needles to metal needles. My larger circular sets are wooden. And it's really difficult to find wooden needles in the smaller sizes. So when I saw that Lykke, I'm just going to go with that pronunciation until one of you corrects me, offered, these are fixed, wooden in small sizes. Oh, and hang on. So US 0 to 3 is is millimeters 2.0 to 3.25. I looked it up this time. I decided to try them because I pretty much knit everything on a 16-inch circular. If I'm using circular needles, I'm probably doing a 16-inch. Every once in a while, there's an exception, like the worsted weight sweater that I showed you. But because of that, I figured if I wanted a set of wooden ones, because they don't offer the interchangeables in this small of a size, I could just get one of each size in 16-inch, and basically that would be a very effective set for me, and it would be fairly affordable. They cost about $8.50 each. So especially if I just buy them as I need them. So I decided to buy the size 3 to experiment with because my metal interchangeable set, they're solid metal. And so the larger sizes, the 2.5 and the 3, so 3.25 millimeters, and I don't know what US 2.5 is. I'm guessing 3.0 millimeters. Are the heaviest ones, so they're the ones I like least out of the metal set. So I thought that I would get wooden ones for that. I really like how these feel in my hands. The join is very smooth. The cable is fine. However, the points are much blunter than what I'm used to. Let's see. I might not be able to show you this because of the lack of color outside. I'm probably going to lose stitches too. Okay. So I'm used to, all of my needles pretty much come from DyakCraft, and they do these very curved tips. So there's not the abrupt transition to the full width diameter as there is on other needles. And then also, I don't know, I mean, they look kind of the same when I'm holding them up, but they don't function the same. With all of my DyakCraft needles, whether they're wooden or metal, I can do purl 5 togethers, I mean, knit 3 togethers, which for me are an equivalent level of fussiness, without really breaking a sweat. Like, those needles feel like an extension of my fingers, whereas the Lykke ones, I think this is the 3rd project I've worked on with them, and even just knit 2 togethers, which I always find fussier than slip knits, are kind of fiddly. So I haven't tried to cable with them yet or anything. I just keep using them in lace projects. I also use them to knit that lace beret I showed you last time and my big lace stole. And so I really like them for plain knitting, like they're fine for the purling. But I'm not sure, I tend to do more complicated knitting, so I need to keep putting these through their paces before I decide whether it's worth getting them in more sizes or not. I want to love them because I really love holding them. They're very lightweight, they feel nice and warm. There's a bit of give to them that there isn't in metal. So for all those reasons I love them. I'm just not sure if the tips are not malleable, I don't know, or precise enough for a lot of the kinds of knitting that I do. So still putting them to the test, but other than all the knit 2 togethers, I'm enjoying them in this project, and they seem to go nicely with the wool and spun yarn. when I used them to knit that beret, that was the out of Brooklyn Tweed Loft, which is an even stickier woolen spun yarn, and they definitely started to stick to those needles, so I think that that might be my limit, but I already have metal needles, so these would just be a replacement. And the reason why I've been looking for a replacement is because I knit most of my sweaters at smaller gauges, and I'm a loose knitter, so I knit a lot of my sweaters on US 0 to 2, which is 2.0 millimeters to 2.75 millimeters. Hope so. And so that means that I'm using my metal needles more than I'm using my wooden needles. So it would be nice to be able to use wooden needles a bit more. We shall see how that goes. But those are my thoughts on them so far. I like their feel, not sure if the tips are the most functional for me. But I'm probably spoiled with my DyakCraft needles. I can't really compare the Luca ones to a lot of the mass market needle brands because I found DyakCraft quite early when I was knitting, and so that's just what I've used after I finally got to the top of the holds list, but I've told you that story at some point. One more project. I'm just throwing everything on the couch instead of back in the basket. This is more gift knitting, and it's another sweater, but I started it last summer. So this is the Busy Sisterhood cardigan, which is a mashup of patterns, basically. And it is for my sister. It was, so for Christmas, not this past year, but the year before, Christmas 2015, I told her that I would knit her a sweater. And I prefer usually to give my knitted gifts as IOUs because I like for the recipient to be able to decide what color, what pattern, that kind of stuff. I was hoping to be able to talk her into a Hito Fude because I think that would be so fun to knit, but I know I wouldn't wear that shape. But instead, she decided that she wanted the honeybee lace because I brought my gray honeybee cardigan with me for that trip. And she really liked the honeybee lace, but she wanted it to be a lot longer. And so in shape, kind of like the Little Waves cardigan pattern. So last summer, I knit the body up to the armpits and both sleeves up to the armpits, and I was planning to join for the yoke. And then I realized that I had knit the sleeves 4 inches too big around the bicep, which is 10 centimeters. I have no idea why I didn't measure the first sleeve instead of just casting on and knitting it, the second one matching before measuring. This still boggles my mind. And it made me very upset at the time. And it was towards the end of summer when this happened. And so I put it into hibernation for a bit, and then I just wanted to knit with wool, and my sister said she didn't mind. So it's been a long time in hibernation. I was actually planning to bring all the pieces home for Christmas so that she could try it on and I could figure out, have a better idea of how much ease to put into the sleeves, but then I forgot. So as soon as I finished my linen cardigan for myself, I pulled this out to start to work on again. And I had to pull both sleeves back to, was it here? Might have been. Maybe a bit longer. So basically I had to pull the sleeves back to there. Then I re-knit to this point, which is where they would have joined. And I've done that on both sleeves. And then I realized that I had knit the sleeves on a smaller needle than I had knit the body for gauge reasons. And that meant that knitting everything together wasn't going to work, and I was going to have to knit it in pieces. So I called my sister and I asked if she wanted a set-in sleeve or a raglan, and she chose a raglan. And I've just done a raglan, so I have some opinions now, and I can try out compound raglan again, which should be fun. But that does mean that I'm doing a seamed raglan for the first time, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that goes. So I've knit both sleeve caps, raglan style, and now I just need to pull out that sweater body and start to do the yoke on that. The honeybee lace is a bit trickier to shape in, just because honeybees, it's very noticeable if you suddenly start taking stitches from them. So I haven't decided how I'm going to do the raglan shaping on that, but I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll just do, some kind of like little decorative thing, I'm not sure. But I did go ahead and add a little seed stitch line on each side of the raglan just for decoration. And then I did the decreases so that they would form an actual line. none of which is going, I'll show you next time. Yeah. So that is how that's working out pretty well. My sister is a little bit bigger than me, but not too much. Those are all of my projects. So I'm just going to start one more segment so I can tell you about some podcasts that I've been enjoying, and then I will let you go. One other thing that I forgot is that my new buttons came in for my raspberry Tart cardigan. Sorry. That I had to show you last time as a finished object, but unbuttoned because I had decided to switch out the buttons. So here it is buttoned. I do think that the button band looks better with the 4-hole buttons as opposed to the shanked buttons, so I think that I am going to stick to flat buttons in the future as much as possible with my knitting. There is still a bit of a wave going on here, and I wonder if that's because when I knit this button band I was following a tutorial. It's a vertical button band and the middle is ribbed, so obviously the ribbing stretches more around the buttons than it does where the buttons are not placed. So, still not sure how I feel about that. I don't know if I would do this band again or not, but I definitely think it looks a lot better with these buttons, and they're much less distracting from the cables. So I'll get up and show it to you a little more closely. A little bit of a wave though. See what I mean? Like, I think it's the ribbing that's pulling, but and I found these on Etsy. They are vintage. I prefer to buy vintage buttons just because from an environmental perspective, I feel like it's better to buy old things that have already been made and would otherwise be thrown out instead of new things that factories are currently making. Although obviously if everyone bought everything vintage, then we'd have to make new things anyway. So that's just why I tend to, if I can find it vintage, that's what I'll do. And I found it's actually, my apologies for the sudden disruption. As I said, I was expecting a phone call that I could not miss, so I had to call it. I think I was telling you about the button store. So it's actually Canadian, which is quite close to me. I live across the lake from Canada. And it's called Busy Beaver Boutique. And the buttons are really reasonably priced. I got quite a few sets since I'm knitting some cardigans. And my old button store, which wasn't very big to begin with, was running low. But for 8 to 10 buttons, I would say they run between $2 and $4 a piece. And then I was expecting shipping to be pretty high because usually Canadian shipping is quite high, but this shipping I think was $4 for everything. So, and the buttons, they look like the pictures, which is always nice. They are plastic buttons. For a while I gotten into glass buttons, and I think they're beautiful, and I love the idea of glass buttons, but they're quite heavy as well. And so I just thought some pretty plastic iridescent ones. I thought the iridescence would help it to blend in more with the pink in case it wasn't an exact match. So I got a mix of, I think, wooden and plastic ones from her shop, but she's got a lot of options and some really lovely ones in various types of material. So plastic has its place. It is useful. And now, podcasts. That was the other thing that I was going to be doing as I button this sweater. I can never remember which podcast I've talked about on my podcast before or not, because I tend to forget to recommend them because I always do it at the end and I just forget when I'm recording. And so there are ones that I've been watching for a long time and I have no idea whether I've told you guys about them or not, so I'm just going to try to do a mix. So there's Mars from the Hey Brownberry Chronicles, and she's just a very warm, she's got a kind of earth mother aura to her. I don't know, she's a very, very cool woman. She's got 2 wonderful teenage daughters, and I know this because they show up in the podcast quite a bit. Her podcast is not the traditional kind of knitting diary format, as I think of most podcasts, like the kind that I do. Instead, it's more of a kind of slices of life. She often records from when she's traveling for work or for fun and puts them all together. And she does all kinds of really fascinating crafts, and it's just really enjoyable to listen to her talking. Her Instagram feed is very fun as well. And yeah, lately she has just switched her name from Brownberry Chronicles to Hey Brownberry, her podcast name. So, but it's the same podcast, so I will include that link. I really enjoy her. It's just really nice to spend time in her presence, and she is just such a encouraging, generous woman on Instagram. She's always leaving incredibly nice, thoughtful comments, and she's just all around Earth Mother, I feel, is a good descriptor. Then there is a new to me podcaster, although she's been doing this for a while, which was great because that meant that I can basically binge watch all of her back episodes, and that is Tommy from Squirrel Pie Productions. She is based in Northern California, like super north, which I'm jealous because it seems like she gets to wear her knitwear an awful lot. Anyway, and she does the traditional knitting type podcast. She's great about doing it almost every week. I'm really impressed by that. She has really interesting knit projects and a variety of things that she does. And she uses a variety of yarn colors and types of yarn and that kind of stuff. So it's really neat to see what she's up to. And it's also just wonderful to spend time in her presence because she is such an upbeat person. Her enthusiasm really comes through on the screen, and when she gets excited about something, you can't help but get excited along with her. And so she's just really, really fun to listen to. When I was having insomnia this weekend, I was definitely enjoying the distraction. Not really distraction, but you know what I mean. It made me much more chipper than I would otherwise have been. And I just really enjoy her. I don't know what else to say. I wish that we were friends in real life because I feel like she's the kind of friend who would always be getting you into neat adventures. Plus, that would mean that I was living in the Northern California coast and could wear knitwear a lot. I mean, I have, like, wonderfully snowy, cold winters. It's just when we're in the summer, then I'm like, why? Why don't I live in the temperate zone? Anyway, back to Tommy. She's got quite a few episodes, and they're all wonderful and very consistently upbeat and really interesting. And she also, it's fun to watch because in some of the episodes she's just started dyeing, and now she has her own dyeing company. So that is Moonstone Dye Works, which I think is a really wonderful name. And yeah, so really enjoy her podcast. And is there anything else to say? I don't think so about that. Oh, she also talks about like animals and movies and books. I don't know. Really enjoy it. Then another one who is new to me, and she's also more new to podcasting in general, but she's still got enough episodes that you can really go back and dive in if you want to, is Stacey Lee, and her podcast is Threaded Yarn, I believe. Twisted Yarn. Uh-oh. Man, hang on, let me check. She's also in California, but she is up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and she gets snow in May. We've gotten snow in April, but not in May. Twisted Threads. That's why I was confused. Twisted Threads podcast. And she also does a really interesting variety of projects that I enjoy hearing all of the details about. She's currently doing a colorwork cardigan with a whole bunch of quince yarns, and so I am following that one avidly. And she talks a lot about the details of her knitting, and she's got 2 cute dogs that tend to lay on her couch, and it's just fun. It feels like knitting, getting together for coffee and knitting with a friend. She is another very upbeat personality. So, and yeah, I really like the kinds of projects that she knits, and I enjoy seeing them develop and hearing her thoughts on them. She also does a hand dye yarn company, and she is very interested in different types of yarn and different bases, so I think that that's really cool. And finally, since I said that I would do 4, and so far I've done all Americans. Well, Marcy is Canadian. Mars, not Marcy, I'm sorry. Morris is Canadian, but she lives in the U.S. So there's also the Tiny Human Knits podcast, and I should know your name. Hang on. Laura. I'm sorry. I'm bad with names. Like, every podcaster says them at the beginning of every episode, and I almost never remember them. Anyway, she's another one who has started quite recently. She moved to a more isolated part of Canada, and so it's kind of her way of having a virtual knitting circle. And she does garments as well as socks and scarves and just different kinds of things. Can you tell what I look for in podcasts? She does a lot of knitting for other people, which I am fascinated by because I primarily knit for myself, out of choice. But yeah, so I'm fascinated by how much of her knitting time she spends working on things for other people, but it does mean that there's always like different types of garments and that kind of thing happening. And she is a very, very open, which is neat to watch, and she has a very, I don't know, her sense of humor makes me laugh. So I'm not sure what type of sense of humor it is, but whatever it is, it works for me. So she is another one that I enjoyed going through her back episodes, and then I'm waiting for her next episode too. So yeah, all excellent podcasters with different styles, but they all tend to knit a variety of things and talk about details in their knitting, which are my favorite types of podcasts. It's been wonderful catching up with you again. I apologize again about the lighting. But the thunderstorm was fun for me to watch, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!